welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, this is Jessica from Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast, and I am welcoming back, because we had you on, I believe, last year, Jayne Cowie, author of One of the Boys, which is a speculative fiction book, and it is quite interesting as a mom of boys myself, who wants to raise good, sweet boys, and you know, it's quite a world out there. This one piqued my interest. So why don't you tell us a little bit about it and where it all came from?
Okay, I will. I'll start by saying thank you for having me back again. It's really nice to be on the podcast again. So, One of the Boys. One of the Boys is a book about a not too distant future in which we have identified a genetic cause for male violence. We can test for these particular genes or for this gene, and we are testing newborn baby boys to see if they have it or not. So it follows two sisters who both give birth to boys quite close together. One has her son tested and one doesn't. And that sets their lives off and the lives of their sons off on these two sort of very divergent, very different pathways as they grow up in a society where boys can now be labelled as good or bad.
So the two sisters, that was like a pivotal, a really big part of the story, which was interesting, is Bea and Antonia. When you wrote the two of them, how did you sort of get into their diverging headspaces while you were writing?
So I knew I wanted to write about sisters. One of the reasons I wanted to do this was because it allowed me to take two women with very different lives, very different thoughts about the world, who are still forced together because they are family, so their lives still intertwine really tightly, even though they're really, really different, and they've been different right from being sort of very young children. I think so. Yeah, that's really why I went down this route. We have the older sister, Antonia, socially ambitious, maritally ambitious, married to a doctor, cares a lot about money and status and how she looks. She has her son tested, he gets a negative test, and she's sort of springboarded off then into a really sort of positive, lovely, well-moneyed, nice existence. Bea is younger, has her son, she gets pregnant by accident, unmarried, no money, no great job, and doesn't have her son tested. So yeah, that was kind of the path that I went down.
So social status does play a lot into just the society in general, and also the sisters as well. And what's interesting is, again, like just thinking about how in our society, a lot of people who are in prison and, who are brought up in situations where they, end up committing crimes and going to prison, a lot of it, you see that they come from a background that almost sets them up to kind of go from one, in a way, bad situation to the next. Did that play into it a little bit when you were sort of drawing the society that, that these two sisters are bringing their sons up in?
Yeah, it did, because I think I really wanted to explore not just this idea of the good boys and the bad boys, but also the influence that social class has when you find yourself in a good or bad situation. And I think we often underestimate the impact that it has, or how much easier life becomes if you can afford to fix your problems. So For B, it becomes very much about, she has this son, she doesn't have him tested. The time at which she doesn't have him tested, the test isn't really a big thing, and she doesn't think much of it. And so she's just sort of, this split second, I've just given birth. She's asked, do you want to be tested? And she says no. And it's an instinctive split second reaction. Later on, she finds that she starts thinking, well, I could now have him tested, but if I do have him tested and he gets a positive result, she can't afford to deal with a positive result, because what happens is that the test has a massive impact economically. So people see this, it becomes a real money spinner, and suddenly we have private medical clinics offering drug treatments. That's one of the ways Antonia's husband makes his money. He offers drug treatments to middle-class parents of boys with positive tests, and B's like, well, I can't afford it. There are parenting classes, there are books, there are, all this advice. There are private schools where your child can only go if they've got a negative test. And this becomes also a way of keeping the test going, because it's now people have got jobs that are dependent on it. So we can't kind of stop testing. So yeah, the fact that B is in this terrible situation then cannot afford to get out of it, which makes her son's life even more difficult as he gets older and they continue down this path. That was really, really important. And it was definitely something I wanted to explore in the book.
Was there like a favorite? I mean, was there a favorite character, or just favorite character traits that you had when you were writing the two of them?
They're both really interesting women, I think, B and Antonia. Very different, and I can understand both of them and the decisions that they make and where they're coming from. I have to say, to be honest, B is my favorite of the two. B is my favorite of the two, because I think B is in just such a tough position, and she's a very sort of tough and resilient character, and she has a lot more self-awareness than Antonia does. I think really Antonia is very keen to feel that she is more responsible for her situation than perhaps she really is, because her path is smoothed by the fact that her husband has got a good job and they've got plenty of money.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, again, like that's just kind of something I just kept coming back to, is just how I mean, and that's not to say, we certainly see our share of criminals or, violent crime come out of, well-to-do families as well, but you do have a lot more doors open to you, and you're almost sort of like, I don't want to say untouched, but you don't have to really look at what else is going on around you when, your path is pretty clear. And, you don't, you can afford to, how do I say this? You can afford to skip the side streets, so to say. Like you can take a car past what you might consider the bad neighborhoods, and you don't really have to look at what's going on. And you could say, oh, everything is, this is okay, as long as, this keeps continuing. But the people who are on those streets are the people who are really going to get hurt, and those are the ones who are usually going to see it. And I think that it was just a really interesting look, just at at gender. I think sometimes because society kind of shapes gender in general and how you're supposed to behave in a certain way. I know I have twin boys, and I was a little nervous because as a woman who definitely I'm a feminist, and I believe in choice, and that we are who we are regardless. And but there was a part of me that when I found out I was having twin boys, I'm like, oh, what, like how I don't want to say anything bad, because my boys are amazing, and they're very sweet, and they're very empathetic, but I mean, you growing up in a time when it was even more so that people were like, well, boys will be boys, you know, you gotta do this, you gotta do that, they gotta toughen up, you know, like it's intimidating, and you know, you kind of wonder, you know, what the role models are going to be that are out there. You know, who are they going to see that they're going to be like, oh, this is who I want to emulate? And you know, really a boy's relationship with his mom, and I'm not trying to be all Norman Bates about it, because not in that creepy way, you know, it's a very tender relationship, because you are their first real prominent female
Yep.
relationship, and sort of how you relate to them. It doesn't just it you know, a lot of times, like, you'll be like, oh well, you know, a guy's relationship with his mom, you know, that'll sort of, you know, set the tone for how he relates to women. Yes, but it's also how he relates to other men.
Yeah.
um
I mean,
and yeah.
I've got one of each. So I had a girl and then a boy. And I know, regardless of kind of what sex your children are, every child is different, and the relationship, therefore, with every child is different. But I do think, in my experience, just that moment of it's a girl, it's a boy, you are immediately in a very different place, and your mind goes to a very different place. And you know that there will be different things in their futures, and there are different things you need to prepare them for, you know. So you have a girl, and you know, you're thinking, you know, one day she might get pregnant, one day she might have a baby, this is a different thing, I need to prepare her for female puberty, this is going a different path. And with a boy, it's a very different future in terms of those sorts of things, you know, you're going to have to prepare him for. And I think it really is a different relationship. And I think also for women, there is also that split second thought of, I don't really know what to do with a boy, I know how to be a girl, I know how to, you know, I know how to go through all those things, I know what those experiences are like, I don't really know what to do with the boy. And then you figure out, well, basically, you know, it's you know, you try and guide them, and you take care of them, and you hold their hand when they need it, and those things are all the same, and you love them the same. But I think there's, at the heart of it, I think it's different.
So so the last book you wrote also kind of delved into a little bit of this. How was One of the Boys different to write than Curfew?
So, crikey, Curfew was written back in 2019. And I just had this idea, some stuff had happened to me, kind of some personal things, and I'd come to a point in my life, I had a complete change of genre of what I was writing, and I wanted to write something completely different. And I just had this idea of, I'm going to write a book about a curfew for men. And I had sort of said in the author letter in the back of that book, it's a thing that I've kind of talked a little bit about, but not in great detail. But obviously, I grew up in a household with domestic violence. My father was a violent man. So this was something I had quite a long experience of. And I had always known that at some point I was going to kind of dig into those experiences and write about that. But the time was never quite right. And then one day it was right. And it was about, how am I going to approach it? What do I really want to say? And that I thought I didn't want to write another book, another Handmaid's Tale about how awful things are for women. I wanted to write about, why aren't we focusing on men? Because actually women aren't the problem here. Women aren't the problem of male violence. We say women get raped, but do you know what? When we leave men out of the sentence, men are the problem here for these behaviours. And I wanted to focus on that. And that's why I wrote that book about Curfew. Coming off the back of Curfew, I then needed to write a second book. I was actually working on a completely different book, got about 3/4 of the way through, and my editors decided they didn't like it. This is quite a common thing in publishing for the inexperienced and the unpublished. It's really common, even when you are published, to be working on a book and for the editor to basically turn around and go, do you know what, it's just not the right time for that book. It doesn't fit. It doesn't work with our marketing plan. It's just not the right book right now. So I had to come up with something else really quickly. And they wanted something which explored similar themes. So the two books would sort of fit together. Came up with 6 elevator pitches. So sort of 2-line what if book ideas. And this idea of the genetic test of newborn boys and the violence gene was the one that they were the most excited by. They said, we think this is the idea that's really got the most to it. and that was kind of the start of it. So the book had to be written, I like to say, very quickly, but I'm not a quick writer because I have to do so many rewrites and seem to be a very slow learner, as my agent has politely told me. But yeah, it was kind of, that was how it started, really, was from that basic idea.
So, without giving too much away, sort of, what do you want people to come out with when after they've read this? Like you were mentioning in the last, for the last one, how, really the problem, with the male violence, it's, we don't focus on on that. And I think like that's, again, as a boy mom, a mom of boys who, just kind of grew up in a time where, like, it was like, well, like if something happens to you, it's because, you shouldn't have worn that shirt, or, like you talked to that guy and he got the wrong idea. And, like I'm, thinking to myself, like, well, when I'm raising my boys, they have like that shouldn't even, like what a girl is wearing shouldn't even be, like what the boys were learning at that time was, well, she's wearing that shirt, it's free game. Well, she talked to you, clearly she wants you. And, like that discrepancy is just wild. What about, so coming out of one of the boys, sort of, if there was like something you could sort of cherry pick there and kind of drop it in the, this is kind of what I'm hoping people grab from it, glean from it, what would it be?
So yeah, I mean, I think when we say boys will be boys, what we really do is we give boys a free pass, because we're saying, oh, look, they can't help themselves. Oh, poor boys are just, what can you do? That's why women need to watch how they dress and what they say and where they go. It's because because men shouldn't be expected to control themselves because they're not capable of it, which obviously is utterly ridiculous. But what I'm hoping people will come out with at the end of this book is sympathy for mothers, because I think there's a lot in this book about motherhood that's really important, about how intense and emotional and difficult motherhood is, whether it goes you're in an easier motherhood or a more difficult. It really is an all-consuming, overwhelming, special, amazing, but often very difficult experience. And I also hope that people will dig in a little bit more into the idea of nature versus nurture, because I think that we are often far too keen to buy into what I like to call the born this way narrative, especially now we're beginning to understand a bit more about genetics. Everybody's on ancestry.com building this huge database of everybody's genetics, and every day they seem to be saying we've decided that these particular genes seem to be associated with this disease, with that disease. We already know, hair color, eye color, blah, blah. It's not long before we're going to be associating genes with behavior. But associating genes with behavior doesn't mean that everything else therefore becomes unimportant. And how you move through the world, the experiences that you have, the choices that you make, and we do have choices about these things, matter. So it's far more complicated than that, really, is what I'm hoping people will see. How we treat people matters.
Thank you so much. This was great. I think people are going to like One of the Boys. The reviews are really, really good. Speculative dystopian fiction is, I don't want to say it's awesome because it's depressing, but at the same time, it
makes you think.
Yeah, it makes you think. It's a genre that makes you think. So I'm looking forward to what comes next from you. Do you have anything in the works?
So at the moment, I'm working on a book which is it's about an algorithm that can scrape your entire internet history, everything you've ever done, everything you've clicked on, looked at, read, tweeted, deleted, every forum post you've done, every sock puppet account you've had, everything you've bought, and is able to solve cold cases by scraping people's internet histories.
I'm in love with this idea. Please, 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 please talk to us about it next year. That's amazing.
Oh, well, we hope so. We hope so. And it should be said for anyone who is like a big social media user or a big internet user, there are algorithms in play already that know things about you that you have not told them or anyone else. So this is
it's so
real
nuts.
coming.
It's so nuts to me because I do think about that a lot. And I'm one of the first people to have be like, I didn't grow up with the internet,
No,
but
I didn't.
it came about when right as I was about to go to college,
Yeah.
it became widely available. Probably between my junior and my senior year of high school is when people started getting those discs with hours of AOL that you could, like you would constantly be looking for more hours. That was a thing. And yeah. So that idea is wild to me because in a way, especially when you're a child, and this is something I try to tell my boys, like what you do online does not go away. And I don't think that that's necessarily something that is understood. And it definitely wasn't understood back then, because when you are a kid or you are a teen and you're doing certain things and you're just like, yeah. And then you kind of realize, oh, maybe that wasn't a stellar moment in my life and I need to learn to, I need to move on from that and I need to move to be a better person. It's like you're shedding your skin and you're moving towards becoming a better person, but there's really no way to shed that skin because you're leaving trails.
And I think particularly for children now, there are conversations about what age to give a child a smartphone. If you give your child a smartphone, I don't know, 11, 12, 13, but you have been posting things about that child onto the internet since the day you got pregnant, their entire life, basically from conception onwards, is already online.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, it's absolutely wild to me. It really, really is. And man.
I think there will be positives to this. There are studies being trialed where they're looking at, for example, algorithms that may be able to detect very early stage cancers based on subtle changes in behavior. In shopping habits, in what sort of things people are browsing. There's a study being done in the UK at the moment with one of the big supermarkets that monitors your shopping habits and various things, saying, can they detect early stage ovarian cancer? Because they're beginning to see now that there are patterns of behavior change that women display before they've got symptoms that they could really kind of pinpoint as symptoms when it's still quite mild and diffuse. And they're saying they think they may be able to pick out women who need to go for early screening before it becomes too advanced.
Which is amazing.
Yeah.
As somebody who lost both of her parents to cancer, I can say that.
Yeah. I mean, those sorts of things are coming, but there's also, obviously, there's going to be a dark side to this as well. And we need to really think about, what we're doing.
Thank you so much. This was awesome.
It was fantastic to talk to you. It's been a great conversation.
Absolutely. So pick up One of the Boys by Jayne Cowie, and we will see you hopefully next time for your next book.
Yes, we hope so.
We are going to close
to you.
Turn the page. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.